Can the Denver Broncos find a way to exploit a pretty significant weakness that the Dallas Cowboys possess? And what are some of the biggest questions about the Denver Nuggets heading into their 2025 season, which kicks off tonight? All things to come on today's rundown, but we begin with a shout out to our friends at Denver Regenerative Medicine. Guys, if weight loss has been a struggle for you, it's time for something real. At Denver Regenerative Medicine, they use full-strength GLP-1 medications with doctor oversight. You can start today with a free consultation and get real results for under $300 a month. Book now at denverregen.com. And we begin today's show with a conversation about the Denver Broncos and specifically the way that they've been operating on offense from a sustainability standpoint, which seems to be kind of flying by the seat of your pants for 3.5 quarters and then finding ways late to unlock productivity and maintain competitive balance that allows the team to move back into position to win the game. We saw an 18-0 scoring deficit erased in the fourth quarter against the Philadelphia Eagles. They just completed one of the more historic comebacks in NFL history against Jackson Dart and the New York Giants. But I don't know that they're going to have the capability to have lightning strike a third time in this NFL season with the Dallas Cowboys on docket next, because the Dallas Cowboys are a wildly polar team in that they have one of the most high-powered offenses in the NFL, both from a rushing and passing standpoint. And defensively, they seem to have a pretty exploitable weakness that I think lies hand in hand with the Denver Broncos' opportunity to try to correct the narrative that they've written through 7 games. But sustainability and consistency on offense has clearly been lacking for this Broncos squad. And if you don't believe me, talk to Jonathan Cooper, who spoke to our Andrew Mason in the locker room after the game about the unnatural nature of their winning and how much they can see it continuing going forward.
Yeah, no, I think everybody knows that. I think everybody has a good sense and feel of that. It doesn't keep going like this. You got to either clean up the mistakes or the mistakes are going to come back and bite you on your ass. And we're fortunate enough that it hasn't happened yet, so we still got time to make sure it doesn't happen.
Well, I would argue that it has bitten them a couple of times this season. In the first 3 weeks of the year, the Broncos got walked off twice by the Indianapolis Colts and the Los Angeles Chargers on last-second field goals that were due to the fact that they started one way offensively and then completely switched to the other. In one case, it was not being able to hold out long enough. In another case, it was starting too slow and then missing opportunities throughout the middle of the game, specifically with the Chargers, that prevented them from even minimally keeping pace and allowing LA to come all the way back offensively as Justin Herbert kind of erupted in clutch time on a final drive to lead the Chargers to victory. So I would argue that they have been bitten a couple of times there, but what I do agree with Jonathan Cooper on is that it clearly isn't sustainable, and the fact that they're self-aware of that is great. That's the first step. The second step, which is I think the much more difficult and confusing step to try to dissect, is how do they solve it? Well, Mike McGlinchey had some thoughts on exactly that with our Andrew Mason in the locker room as well.
I think it's a little bit of a lot of small things, right? I think it's details at practice, making the urgency a little bit higher at practice. I think it's a mentality when you go in on Sunday that, hey, sometimes you just got to let it fly. Don't overthink it. Just call the play, run the play, and do it like you did in the fourth quarter when we didn't have a choice. And so when your back's against the wall, all of a sudden that I don't have another option kind of takes over. And I think that's a mentality we need to play with, all the time.
The mentality that they need to play with all the time, clearly signaling and acknowledging a significant mentality shift that exists in quarters 1 and 2 and 3 that seems to suddenly change in quarter 4. McGlinchey mentioned there that they seem to have success executing on offense when their backs are against the wall and they just have to, quote, go out there and do it. And there's that word again that seemed to pop up a handful of times in the last week or so, execution. I believe personally that execution and a lack of faith in the execution of the offense is the reason why we see Sean Payton call the game that he does and the Broncos offense look the way that it does, certainly first and foremost starting with quarterback Bo Nix. So if we're going to move forward as the Denver Broncos, and if they are going to find a way to be able to play in the fourth quarter the way that or if they're going to find a way to play in the first three quarters the way they did in the fourth quarter, the execution is what has to be better. If they can execute a wider variety of offensive looks, plays, and formations at a level that is high enough and consistent enough to allow Sean Payton to call the game and implement those plays against an NFL defense that has had their ample time to prepare, then I think we will see the offense look more similar to what we saw in 2024, not necessarily from a complexity standpoint, because I do think a lot of what we saw last year feels like what we saw in the fourth quarter against Philadelphia and in the fourth quarter, certainly against the New York Giants, playing loose, playing free, having a good balance and mix of explosive plays. This time in 2025, perhaps with more offensive rushing production to supplement Bo Nix's passing ability and not relying basically virtually on Bo Nix's legs to carry that side of the football. That's not the way the Broncos are built anymore. They have J.K. Dobbins, who's a top 10 rusher in the NFL through 7 weeks of the season. And with health being the only primary concern from holding him back from being that year in and year out, he's been relatively healthy, all knock on marble again there thus far. And I think that it's been significant enough to push R.J. Harvey down into the wings as a second-round pick that was kind of speculated in the preseason as someone who was going to be relied upon as the RB1 going into 2025. Sean Payton and Bo Nix both have dirt on their hands when it comes to the messy Broncos offense that we see for roughly 75% of the game during the first 7 weeks of the season. And I believe execution and a lack of execution, certainly a lack of faith in the ability to execute, is the reason why we haven't seen as much growth, improvement, and development week to week to week. This week against the Dallas Cowboys presents an opportunity for the Denver Broncos to help right that narrative. So many in Broncos country have been clamoring for more utilization of J.K. Dobbins and even R.J. Harvey as a collective rushing offense. Sean Payton's infamous run the ball on the play sheet made an appearance again already this season. And if there was ever an opportunity to really lean into that philosophy, it is this week against the Dallas Cowboys, who have the worst, if not, who have the worst rushing attack or rushing defense in the NFL. Let me repeat that, because I think that sometimes things get lost in translation. This week against the Dallas Cowboys presents no better opportunity for the Denver Broncos to correct the narrative that has plagued them for a season and a half under the era of Bo Nix and Sean Payton, which is their inability to effectively commit to and execute running the football. The Dallas Cowboys have the 32nd ranked rushing defense in the NFL. Quite literally dead last. Matched up against a Broncos offense that, even despite themselves at times and their inability to stay consistent with it, have a top 10 rushing offense in the NFL and a top 10 rusher in J.K. Dobbins leading the way. So the mentality, the mindset that Mike McGlinchey talked about, utilizing the run game against the Dallas Cowboys is the first step to bringing balance back to the offense, to unlocking the playmaking potential that we see in the fourth quarter against the Philadelphia Eagles, against the Dallas Cowboys, and the like. That is the first step, in my opinion, from a broader season perspective, sure. But starting with this week against the Cowboys, that is the first step to unlocking those playmaking abilities and using the mentality and the executional success that Mike McGlinchey talked about. That is how you, even though Jonathan Cooper and that defense and that team are self-aware of their ability to kind of turn things on, and they've gotten lucky that they've overcome a significant amount of penalties, a lack of balance, and poor execution, that luck isn't going to last forever. So if there was ever going to be a time to push that throttle firmly forward and move into the back half of this NFL season with a better and more established, cleaner offensive identity, it starts by running the football this weekend against the Cowboys. And hopefully not allowing Javonte Williams, the former Broncos lead back from 2024, who is now finding immense success with the Dallas Cowboys through the first 7 games of 2025, to do the same. Shifting gears to the Denver Nuggets, we have their season ready to kick off tonight against the Golden State Warriors, who got a warm-up game against the Los Angeles Lakers to kick off their season. And on the morning, the early afternoon of the beginning of the 2025 Denver Nuggets season, I find myself asking some questions. We've discussed, is it championship or bust for Denver in 2025? I think that it is, for reasons that we've kind of pontificated upon for a number of weeks now. Jokic is a NBA superstar in his 30s. The Western Conference, specifically with the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Houston Rockets, and the coming up from behind San Antonio Spurs with Victor Wembanyama, who looks like he is poised for a significant 2025 campaign to further put his stamp on the National Basketball Association. A Western Conference that is building in arms and strength around the Denver Nuggets and forcing their path to a NBA Finals and potential NBA championship to be harder and harder on that side of the bracket. We've discussed whether or not Michael Porter Jr. and Cam Johnson will be a better swap, an even swap, or potentially some deficiencies there, despite some of the frustrations that we saw with Michael Porter Jr. Then you get into the supporting cast with Jonas Valanciunas and Bruce Brown and Tim Hardaway Jr. Lots of questions to be asked about the Denver Nuggets, and our own Jake Shapiro, Denver sports analyst for DenverSports.com, host of the Mile High Hoops podcast, and many other digital elements here at Denver Sports 104 Through the Fan, put together his top 5 questions surrounding the Denver Nuggets heading into 2025, and they are as follows. 1, who is David Adelman, the head coach? David Adelman has been a member of the assistant coaching staff for a number of years now, and now finds himself taking the reins. Will Jonas Valanciunas excel in his role as the backup to Nikola Jokic, and maybe one of the better ones since Jokic was in that position? Cam Johnson versus Michael Porter Jr., the newest member of the Nuggets starting lineup, coming over in the blockbuster trade from the Brooklyn Nets. How will he ingrain himself into the Nuggets offense, and how will Jokic be able to, as he's done for so many players over the course of his career, elevate and bring the best out of that specific player? Then there's questions about the starting rotation. We saw a lot of emphasis last year placed on the quote-unquote heavy 5. The Nuggets starters, because of their inability to maintain competitive balance when their bench unit was deployed, saw their starters playing more minutes than almost any other starting 5 in the NBA. Will that continue? Or have the Nuggets front office co-executive vice presidents of Ben Tenzer and Jonathan Wallace done enough to bring in a deep veteran bench in addition to growth from some of the rookie and young talent on the roster to be able to steady that tide when Jokic and the other guys hit the bench? And 2 of those names in particular, young guys that are going to continue their growth track, Julian Strawther and Payton Watson. Will they take a leap in their NBA careers and find themselves making plays in a much more crowded rotation? So many questions to pontificate there, starting with the very valid one right off the top. Who is David Adelman, the head coach? We have known David Adelman as an assistant on this staff for a number of years. He was Michael Malone's right-hand man as a bench coach, and somebody that the players clearly believe in and have instilled trust in, as evidenced by the fact that when Michael Malone gets fired with 3 games to go in a regular season, and Adelman is charged with closing out the wrap-up duties on the 2024 regular season and moving into a very pivotal, very highly anticipated postseason, as is every postseason for the Nuggets since they won the title. And the players are expressing nothing but belief, faith, and admiration for David Adelman, campaigning for him to maintain the full-time job. And there were many in Nuggets Nation who didn't want that to be the case because they wanted a more veteran outside hire, somebody that can come in and immediately command the respect and bring the level of gravitas at the head coaching role that warrants what the Nuggets should have, given the fact that they have the best player in basketball on their roster, and he is someone who has transformed and brought their franchise to relevance in a way that there were legitimate questions whether or not they would ever reach that mountaintop prior to Nikola stumbling his way into Denver during a Taco Bell commercial and becoming the greatest player in franchise history. So what will David Adelman's hallmarks and stamps be on this organization? It seems to be hinting already that there will be less of an emphasis on the fast break offense, which we saw Nikola Jokic operate pretty flawlessly. Christian Braun playing a huge part as one of the better transition scorers in the National Basketball Association. Will there be a more slow, methodic, and thought-through pace and more of an emphasis on plays and sets that David Adelman has spent so much of his career orchestrating and drawing up on the whiteboard? Jonas Valanciunas, arguably the best backup big since at least DeMarcus Cousins operated in that role behind Nikola Jokic. DeMarcus Cousins may be the only backup big in the Jokic era that fans, media, and the team reasonably wanted to see more of beyond just the standard bench minute spot duty responsibility. Jonas Valanciunas projects to be a significant leap above that tier and somebody that could work their way into game-specific, series-specific, strategically specific operations to move in alongside Jokic and play in a larger, tall lineup with Jokic and Valanciunas at the 4 and the 5, and utilizing a skill set that Jonas Valanciunas has as a capable spot-up shooter with a distributor like Jokic to space the floor and put size in areas where the Nuggets have been unable to do so in recent years. Cam Johnson being the newest member of the Denver Nuggets starting five, I have gone on record fairly frequently to say that I think that Cam Johnson's floor as a Denver Nugget is essentially a net neutral or slight uptick from everything that Michael Porter Jr. was able to provide. I think Cam Johnson's three-point shooting ability and jump shooting ability, especially in catch-and-shoot situations, is as good as about anybody in the NBA, and certainly something that can help mask or make up for the offensive production that was brought to the table by Michael Porter Jr. and do it at that rate in a more consistent way. I also think Cam Johnson is a significantly better ball mover and shot creator within the offense, allowing the offensive flow to move through Cam Johnson at his position on the wing and not be the end of the line railroad crossing that it was when Michael Porter Jr. occupied that space. There was very little ball movement through Michael Porter Jr. It was basically ball movement through others and to MPJ, where the line usually stopped with a made or missed shot. Defensively, I also think, defensively, a lot of frustration from Michael Porter Jr. on that end of the court. I think defensively, Cam Johnson offers you more in that regard as well. And especially when you factor in the additions of Bruce Brown and Tim Hardaway Jr. to go along with Jonas Valanciunas as a bench unit with Julian Strawther and Peyton Watson, I don't expect the Nuggets' legacy of the heavy five that carried over from 2024 to be a thing here in 2025. Now, when the postseason rolls around, you may see obviously some different adjustments to that, but I think there's going to be a concerted effort, given the pieces that Ben Tenzer and Jonathan Wallace went out of their way to acquire, and the 8 or 9 playable players in the regular season and theoretically postseason that the Nuggets now possess, I think there will be a much more significant and needed emphasis on getting guys like Nikola Jokic and Aaron Gordon rest to be able to, one, especially in the case of Aaron Gordon, stay healthier. Aaron Gordon's deteriorating health, forcing him to have to play in a Game 7 against the eventual champion Oklahoma City Thunder with a grade 2 hamstring strain, and clearly not allowing him to play at his best. That is something that if Aaron Gordon is healthy and at 100%, I think that series may very well go a different way. And it may not come down to the latest tip-in NBA history for the Denver Nuggets to move out of the first round with the Los Angeles Clippers. Aaron Gordon obviously being the heroic figure in that exchange as well. And then for Julian Strawther and Peyton Watson, look, it's looking like those two, who were reasonable contributors for good stretches of last season, are now finding themselves in a little bit deeper of a hole to be able to find playing time minute to minute, game to game during this NBA season. So will Julian Strawther continue to develop offensively and be able to create a situation where the main takeaway from his minutes on an NBA basketball court is not his startling ability to turn the ball over or a glaring lopsided nature in the plus-minus box? Peyton Watson, with his length and ability to present a defensive matchup on the court, can he continue to help bring that identity to the bench unit and be able to progress and take that leap in his NBA career where there's going to be a significantly less or lighter opportunity to make impacts given all of the new faces? So which of these questions is the most important question? That's fair to ask. I think they all kind of play various parts and roles. But I think if we're discussing between David Adelman and who he develops into as an identity as a head coach, Jonas Valanciunas' ability to work in as the backup big behind Jokic and provide relief to potentially other spots as well, playing alongside Jokic, Cam Johnson's ability to replace Michael Porter Jr., or the starting rotation playing time in Julian Strawther and Peyton Watson, I would argue of the questions that Jake Shapiro rightfully put together at DenverSports.com about the biggest question marks surrounding the Denver Nuggets heading into 2025, it's close between two specific players mentioned here, but I think I am going to give the nod in importance to Jonas Valanciunas and his ability to excel in the role that he has been brought in to serve. And that role is twofold. It is the obvious role of being the backup big to Jokic, providing him respite off the bench and an ability to consistently and sustainably survive the non-Jokic minutes on the basketball court. But Valanciunas' potential, as was outlined early in the process after the trade by Ben Tenzer and Jonathan Wallace, and echoed by David Adelman, is the ability to play at the four alongside the Joker and different offensive capabilities and size matchups that it gives David Adelman to be able to deploy over the course of an arduous, long 82-game season. Jonas Valanciunas, starring in his role, will have as big or bigger of an impact as anyone on the roster. Cam Johnson replacing Michael Porter Jr. will be big, and I think he is absolutely set up to do so. But even though he's not in the starting lineup, I think Jonas Valanciunas and his ability to maximize the potential that exists with the role he has been brought in to serve with the Denver Nuggets will have a significant sway in the long-term sustainability, viability, and strength of this Nuggets team that exists in a championship or bust window in 2025. It all starts tonight, though. We will get our first look at the 2025 Denver Nuggets and what they will bring to the table. They certainly, if they're talking about a hot start, have a lofty bar set by their Ball Arena co-tenants, the Colorado Avalanche, who will continue into action this week. The Denver Broncos continuing to prepare for the Dallas Cowboys, the Javonte Williams revenge game, and a little bit of a litmus test on both sides of the ball for this offense, who has kind of slugged and dragged their way through 7 weeks the majority of the quarters throughout the 7 games that they've begun the season with. And the Broncos defense, who was one of the best and continues to remain high in the list of defenses with the capability to pressure and get after the quarterback. But Jackson Dart, Cam Scatterbo, and company gave Denver all they could handle for 3.5 quarters. And it's time for the Broncos defense to face their stiffest test, in my opinion, of the regular season against the Dallas Cowboys offense that is firing on all cylinders. CeeDee Lamb back in the lineup as their wide receiver 1, operating alongside and opposite George Pickens, who is playing at a wide receiver 1 level as the wide receiver 2, similar to what we see with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase in Cincinnati quite often, or Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson in Minnesota. And Javonte Williams, similar to what we saw in the Jets game, which turned out to be an ugly slugfest. You got 2 very highly rated and productive rushing offenses going at it, and whichever one is able to edge out the other, I think will have a significant say in what the scoreboard entails and dictates after 60 minutes of football. We will be here to chronicle it all for you at Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan. Stay locked in on our app, on your radio dial, or on DenverSports.com, where you can stream all of our radio content throughout the day. And while you're at DenverSports.com, check out the massive library of written content on the Broncos, Buffs, Nuggets, Avs, Rockies, Rams, and any other sports information across the Front Range, entertainment, news, and analysis. We have it all there for you. And like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can continue to consume live digital content like this show, The Rundown, from the nosebleeds with Joey and Trent, the Mile High Hoops and Hockey podcast, which are back in full swing, and of course, the crown jewel of digital football content, Orange and Blue Today, with Andrew Mason and Cecil Lammy. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday afternoon. The weekend is almost within reach, and we will catch you for a Friday edition tomorrow at noon on The Rundown.
I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the work. I only